And we're learning more about Sergeant Devin Seibel, a soldier from Central Texas who died in a training-related incident on an airbase in Iraq. News 10's Nate Smith joins us now with more about this fallen soldier. Nate.
Gordon, Sergeant Seibel was a Robinson ISD graduate walking the stage in 2018, and we've been in contact with the school district today, and they shared more with us about how they remember Seibel. So in a statement they sent to us, the district said, quote, "Robinson ISD is deeply saddened by the tragic loss of Devin Seibel, a 2018 graduate of Robinson High School who was recently killed in a military accident. Though he joined our district during his senior year, he left a lasting impression as a dedicated student with a profound desire to serve his country." Now, this is a yearbook picture from Sergeant Seibel's junior year at Crawford High. Members of the Crawford community say he went there before he went to school in Robinson. They also say his mother taught in Crawford at the time. One of his teachers in Robinson remembers him as a, quote, "super hard worker and a great student," with another adding, "The military was a career path he had prepared for and was excited about." Seibel was assigned to the Airbase Ambulance Company 2nd Battalion, 4th Combat Aviation Brigade at Fort Carson in Colorado. His brigade commander had the following to say about his passing. Quote, "As a flight paramedic supporting Operation Inherent Resolve, he consistently delivered outstanding patient care and embodied the highest standards of our profession. His loss is deeply felt across the entire Ivy Eagle Brigade, and his legacy of service, compassion, and dedication will not be forgotten." End quote. During his time of service, Sergeant Seibel received 5 Army Achievement Medals, as well as a pair of Good Conduct Medals and a NATO medal to go along with various other awards. The incident also took the life of a 29-year-old British soldier, Lance Corporal James Freeman. Reporting in studio, Nate Smith, KWTX News 10.